Jim The Anvil Neidhart died earlier this week, 63 years old. This is on the heels of Bruno Sammartino passing away this year, Vader, Nikolai Volkov, Brian Christopher, Matt Capitelli. That's not even all the names. So it's been one of those years, unfortunately, as far as wrestler deaths are concerned. And again, it's one thing if you have somebody who's in their 70s, 80s, 90s. Bruno was, I believe, in his 80s. Bruno lived a long, hell of a life that Bruno had. But guys like Vader and Anvil, and of course Brian Christopher, who wasn't even 50 years old, these are guys that should still be around. So just horrible, horrible news. Anvil had health issues, but this came as a shock to everybody. It wasn't a case where he was very, very sick on his deathbed. People were expecting this. He had a lot of issues. He's had issues in the past, but this was very unexpected. TMZ says he fell and hit his head very early in the morning. Actually, Ross Hart, who was his brother-in-law, he told the Associated Press that Neidhart suffered from Alzheimer's disease. And there was, a few months ago, Chris Nowinski, I think accidentally let it leak. There was something he posted on Instagram, and he was talking about Natty and her bravery, in the face of her father suffering from Alzheimer's. And I think he took it down because he realized that probably was not meant for public consumption. That's when the Alzheimer's story started to circulate about Neidhart. But now we hear from family members that pretty much say he had Alzheimer's. And it was believed that what happened is he suffered a seizure. He got up, he was very cold, he went to go change the thermostat in the middle of the night, and that's when they think he had a seizure. He fell, hit his head, and he started convulsing, and he passed away shortly thereafter. Bret Hart was too broken up about it to even say anything, and Bret usually, he puts out very nice blogs sometimes. He likes to write. Bret is a writer. I'm sure in due time he will have a lot to say about the Anvil. He was very close to him. He was family. They were tag team partners. They traveled the road for many years together. He was an instrumental part of his career. But he was too broken up to say anything about it. He posted on social media. He said, "Stunned and saddened. I just don't have the words right now." And I don't think anybody has heard from Bret since. So hopefully he's doing okay. But apparently Bret had been pushing very hard for a while now for WWE to induct the Hart Foundation, the tag team, I assume, not the faction, into the WWE Hall of Fame, because he knew of Neidhart's Alzheimer's, and he knew that there probably would not be too much time before it really started to impact him, and he wanted him to be able to be cognizant and aware and enjoy his induction into the Hall of Fame. I think Neidhart was kind of bitter about it too. I mean, he was at one of these WrestleCon type events, and he was interviewed. I think it was an interview that was done on the Great North Wrestling channel that Devin Nicholson has. He's got some good content up there. And this is going back maybe a year or two. And you could tell in the interview he was pretty bitter about the fact that he was not in the Hall of Fame. He may have accidentally referred to him as a Hall of Famer. Dave Penzer was interviewing him. And he's like, "I'm not a Hall of Famer." And you could tell it really bothered him. So to hear that Bret knew of his struggles and was trying to lobby to get them to, do something with the Hart Foundation before it was too late, and here we are. And you look at Vader. Vader passed away. Vader should be in the Hall of Fame. Vader will one day be in the Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, like Macho Man and others, he will not be there to enjoy it. He will not be there to give his own induction speech. I think that sucks. I really do. And the Hart Foundation is a worthy team. You'll have the critics of Bret Hart saying, well, of course he just wants to go into the Hall of Fame twice like Hulk Hogan did, or not Hogan, but Ric Flair. Hogan may well one day end up going in as part of the NWO or something, but it's just very sad. It's very sad that he won't have that opportunity. Just to give some background here, I didn't even know this, but in looking at some of the information on WWE.com, I was wondering, where did the nickname The Anvil come from? I've heard Bret talk about the Hitman nickname before, but not the Anvil. It comes from him winning an anvil throwing contest, or at least participating in an anvil throwing contest many, many years ago. An anvil throwing contest, by the way, sounds like an absolutely horrendous idea when you say that out loud. But that's where the name comes from. He did play for the Oakland Raiders and the Dallas Cowboys, although it was only, I think, in preseason games with the Raiders. And with the Cowboys, he attended their training camp, and he was cut after 3 weeks. And that was during the 1978 season where they went on to win the Super Bowl. He ended up getting trained by Stu Hart. He worked up in Stampede for a time before coming to WWE. He was paired off with Bret as the Hart Foundation. And Neidhart really was there, in large part, to help groom Bret, to get Bret ready for some bigger role down the road. Because if you watch the early days of the Hart Foundation, I mean, Anvil really was he was the soul of that team, man. I mean, the guy was charismatic. He could talk. Bret was just the shits back then. If you watch those early Hart Foundation promos, he got better over time. He got more comfortable. But I mean, you would watch, and he was nervous. He just wasn't very good. The Anvil carried a lot of those interviews. But the goal and the idea was, we have bigger ideas for Bret as a single one day, and so we'll pair him off with Neidhart, and he'll help him along. That was sort of the idea. The Hart Foundation, they were my second favorite tag team of all time, behind only Demolition. The Harts, the Bulldogs, Demolition, Strike Force, the Rougeaus, those were the teams that I grew up on, in the Northeast watching WWE. After he got fired, Neidhart was out of the company for a while. He did come back. He came back in 1994. He turned heel. He aligned with Owen Hart. This after they had a brief stint in early 92 as the New Foundation. They were actually a tag team for a while. And it was funny, too, because the little period there of a few years after Neidhart got fired in 92, he actually worked for New Japan. He was part of the G1 Climax. We're just coming off the G1. Now imagine Jim The Anvil Neidhart in the G1. It's hard for me to sort of conceptualize this, but yeah, he was in the G1. He went to WCW. He was briefly in ECW before he finally came back to WWE in 94. He had a brief but memorable run for all of maybe a month or a couple of months as the masked man called Who on WWE television. That was in 1996, which was so stupid. I mean, it was very obvious and clear to everybody who it was under the mask, but they put him under the mask anyway. In 97, he came back as himself, and he hooked up with Bret, Owen, Bulldog, and Brian Pillman as the Hart Foundation faction. He was part of that legendary 10-man tag team match at the Calgary Saddle Dome, right? Canadian Stampede pay-per-view in July of 97. One of the greatest matches in company history. And really one of the best, I think, two best Neidhart matches in his WWE run. The other being the 2 out of 3 falls match for the tag team titles at SummerSlam 1990 against Demolition. That actually Michael Cole mentioned that match on Monday night. Their SummerSlam 89 match against the Brainbusters is another favorite. That's a match, if you're looking for like a good SummerSlam, I guess SummerSlam is maybe over by the time you hear this, but if you're looking for a good SummerSlam match to go back and watch, I think that opened the show at SummerSlam in 89, and that was a hell of a match. But yeah, I feel bad for Natty, obviously. She was very close to her father. She put a statement out and was saying, she's overwhelmed by all the support and thanking everybody for all their kind words. I know that the Anvil made a lot of appearances on Total Divas, and so he was part of that reality show, and she was very close to her father, and I know what it's like to lose a parent. It sucks. And one of the things, and I know people mean well when they say this, and I'm sure some of you can probably relate to this. Whenever something like that happens, you lose a parent, and somebody goes, "Oh, I know I know how you feel. I know what you're going through." No, you don't. No, you don't. You think you do, but you don't. Even if you yourself have lost your mother, lost your father, no two experiences are the same. That's one of the worst things you could say to somebody. FYI, for future reference. There's certain things that you say to comfort people in times like that, and there are things that really should not be said. And not everybody may feel this way, but I do. That's one of those things that you really should avoid saying, because you don't know how that might trigger somebody. because like I said, everybody goes through grief and experiences like that differently. No two experiences are the same. You don't know how I feel. And I hope that it's a long, long time before you ever have to know how I feel. So it sucks. And, we also had another death this week, another wrestling death. I guess technically you can consider it a wrestling death. The Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, the legendary Aretha Franklin, passed away this week. I don't recall offhand what her age was, but I know she had a lot of health issues recently. But she performed at WrestleMania 3, right? It was America the Beautiful, I believe. WrestleMania 3. That legendary introduction by Vince McMahon, as only Vince could do it when he introduced her. And then 20 years later, they came back to Michigan. They came back to the Motor City, and WrestleMania 23, Aretha Franklin came back, and she sang again at the beginning of the show, which I thought was really cool. And depressingly, though, sadly, she was probably one of the few names that were still left alive from that WrestleMania 3 card. But yeah, so she has her place in wrestling history as well. And so that makes 2 wrestling deaths in the same week.